Kabugoiga, everybody. My name's Thomas Mayer. I'm a Larrakia, Torres Strait Islander man, coming to you from Larrakia country in Darwin. You're joining us for the Raising Peace Festival around the International Day of Peace. Today is the First Nations Day, and there are 4 panels that we have for you. I'm going to introduce this first one soon, but importantly, we will begin with a welcome to country from Nathan Moran from Metro Land Council. Nathan, please give us a welcome to country, brother, and introduce yourself.
Juri Gamarua, Dian, Babana Gamarada, Gadigal Nura. On behalf of Metro, local Aboriginal Land Council as the CEO, I acknowledge I'm currently gathering from Gadigal country. The words that I open in is the language of Gadigal. Provided by Paddy Garang, those words translate to G'day, women, men, comrades, friends, gathering from Gadigal country here today. It's a great honour and privilege on behalf of Metro Local Land Council to open the Indigenous or First Nations yarn up around peace, our people's continuing role in the matter of peace. And on behalf of our land council as one of the first local land councils of Australia, it's a great honour and privilege to open up today's yarn and chat. I look forward to talking a bit more with you all a bit later about the area that I represent today and my people's role in the area of peace. Bajuri Gamarua, g'day.
Thank you for that welcome, Nathan. I also pay my respects to the traditional owners of the First Nations of all of the lands on this continent and adjacent islands, and from wherever you're coming from and joining us today. Please feel free to use the chat box to acknowledge country yourselves as well, all of those that have joined us for this very special panel. This panel is yarning with First Nations. And we've got some really special panelists joining us today. This session is about focusing on the history of the struggle, how we have managed to not only survive but fight back, regain our rights and revitalise our culture, and share that with you today. A bit more about myself before I introduce the panelists. I'm Thomas Mayer. I'm a Torres Strait Islander, and I was a wharfie for 16 years, and I am a National Indigenous Officer of the Maritime Union of Australia, the MUA. I'm also an author. I've written a number of books that are, strategically placed behind me, and so I'm facilitating this session. I'm going to invite the panelists to talk soon, and towards the end of the session, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions in the chat. And then right at the end of this session, I will be inviting you to make sure that your videos are on and your speakers are on, and then we're going to have a little bit of an action to end the whole session. So now I'll introduce our speakers. Nathan Moran, who you just heard give the welcome, is joining us. We also have with us Emelda Davis. Emelda is the founding chairwoman of the Australian South Sea Islanders, a social justice and community development not-for-profit. Welcome, Emelda. And she'll introduce herself some more soon. Carol Vale is joining us as well. Carol is the founder of Murawin. At Murawin, she strengthens cultural competencies and professional capabilities. Welcome, Carol. And we also have with us Shane Charles. Shane Charles is got to find it here, is a Wurundjeri, Boon, Warrung and Yorta man, and he's coming to us from that way. Welcome, Shane. And lastly, we have Adrian Russell joining us, and we're going to be playing a film after the first opening words from our panelists, and he will introduce the film. So welcome, Adrian. I'd like to ask Nathan to share with us where he's coming from and the work that he does first.
Again, Bajuri Gamarua, g'day all. I currently am the CEO of Metropolitan Local Land Council, as I opened. I'd like to acknowledge I'm a Whangari and I'm a Biripai Guri. My peoples are from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Mum's born in Kempsey, have extended cultural connections through my Biripai heritage to the Manning areas, or what many mob know as the area where the greatest footballer today, Latrell Mitchell, comes from. Oh, sorry for those who don't realise, that's called Taree. I am a Guri. I work as a local land council CEO. I have been the CEO now for 8 years. I work on behalf of all Aboriginal people within the area that I look after and our council's responsible for. Our area includes beautiful country, extending from Wonnarua in the far north, right down to the edges of Dharawal country, or the Takora, as it's known to us, the Georges River, on the edges of Bidjigal country. In fact, we cover 24 what the non-Aboriginal people call local government areas. We're responsible for 11,000 Aboriginal people, and we interact with over 2 million non-Aboriginal people. We're responsible for protecting and preserving all the culture and heritage within our patch. That includes registered over 4,700 sites that we work with the state government, the Commonwealth government, local governments and stakeholders to preserve, protect, and really cherish on behalf of our community. I'd like to acknowledge all the respective peoples who have gathered here this morning to yarn and chat about the subject. And certainly I'll do my best to represent my council, the backyard that we represent and the journey that we've been on in interacting with non-Aboriginal people since 1788. The patch I represent, and starting with acknowledgement to Colby and Doringa, represents the first area where non-Aboriginal people set up permanent camp or colonised. That occurred at what people call Farm Cove, or Woolmagully, as the old people call it. From that place, the area that I now represent, we commenced a journey of seeking out peace, be it from Colby and Doringa as the representatives of the Gadigal. Some of you may more commonly know the name Bennelong or Wongal, part of our boundary to the west or inner west areas of Sydney town today. Bennelong certainly is an attribute of our culture, an epitome really of our people, that we are diplomatic people. We've always sought to try and resolve things humanely, respectfully. And the interactions that I share with you in the history attest this. Whereas our people's first interactions commenced with not only the establishment permanently of removing Woolmagully and forming Farm Cove, but certainly within about 9 months' time, or by December 1788, we had the kidnapping of our first ever First Nations person. And I pay my honour and respects to the Ganagal people, Arabanu, the beautiful man who was a patriarch of the area that they now call Manly, or to the old fellas Ganagal. He was our first kidnapped First Australian or First Nations person. He was imprisoned and taken back to Woolmagully, where unfortunately he passed away while enslaved or imprisoned. But shortly thereafter, his passing, the first or second interaction after that, initial one, was the kidnapping of Bennelong and Colby. And certainly through that second kidnapping, and certainly acknowledging Colby's escape and choosing not to participate in interactions with the new arrivals, Bennelong, on the other hand, certainly started what is probably the first narrative of a discussion or yarn to seek out peace on behalf of the First Nations of Australia. And whilst history hasn't been fully written to respect the man Bennelong, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of our Land Council that he represents for us someone who certainly first began yarns based on seeking out a respectful relationship with the new arrivals. We acknowledge, but unfortunately, that it didn't pan out exactly in accordance with what we would see as honourable, respectful, or based on what we know today as terms like equitable, fairness, or just manners to say as equal humans. But as a local land council, I'd like to acknowledge that our area has also been an area in regards to peace of, standing up for our people at the same time whilst we seek peace. We do fight against injustice, and we have one of the proudest ancestral, peoples in our First Nations of Australia in Pemaway, a great resistance leader who took out the hitman of the penal colony, what they called the gamekeeper, Mr. McIntyre, when he was let loose into country to shoot and kill whatever he wanted, including our people, harming our people firstly down in Gadigal country. He was let loose and ended up in Wongal country. And when trying to enter Bidjigal country, the great Bidjigal warrior Pemaway did the deed on behalf of our people to take out the most evil human that had arrived in our recent times. But the way in which we did that was to not go and seek out to remove all of them or take them all out, as some would say. We dealt with the appropriate person according to the deed that they did. And it's a deep underlying of our culture, what some would say our law. Down this way, they say Yulang, the cultural law or ceremony that keeps us, that keeps the order, that instills how we deal with business, how we deal with conflict. That was certainly dealt with by Pemaway. In respects to Bennelong, I would acknowledge, for some who don't know, he led the punishment for Arabanu's kidnapping by taking the governor or cajoling the governor with Colby to go over back to Ganagal country to Manly Cove, where he faced his punishment, where Mourning, a Gamagal patriarch, did the business and speared him. But the way we dealt our business was, of course, he was wounded. He didn't directly take the life of Arabanu, but he certainly led to it. But he was speared. And I think it's worth noting the way in which we do our business is always the most honourable human diplomacy that I would suggest is known on earth. And that represents, for me, the culture of peace that all First Nations people have, possess, must maintain and have responsibility for. And I'll just close out by saying, as a Guri, my peoples, my mum's born on Burnt Bridge Reserve in Kempsey, New South Wales. We call it the Aboriginal or Black capital of New South Wales, if not Australia. I take it from all the other mob. Yeah, that's just to throw out to you all. As a Kempsey person whose parent, mother was born and grandparents were put into reserves, and firstly, my great-grandparents, the first generations of my people who were put into the reserve systems in 1883 with the establishment at Rowlands Plains. The interactions that our people had prior to that was based on dispossession, murder and massacre, theft. Our peoples have a deep history of knowing where those massacre places and bad interactions occurred. And as a Guri myself, growing up with my grandparents, thankfully, being one of those who had grandparents who lived into their 80s, I got to live with them, and bless them, when I meet them again, they may say I tormented them, but I certainly had the privilege and honour to ask them and get from them what their grandparents had spoken to them about our interactions, more importantly, our reactions to people who might not bring peace or might not know peace. But my grandfather put it to the best deeds possible when acknowledging that I have Gaelic and also Celtic ancestry through my father. I have mixed lineage lines. He said to me, do not do what your father's mob may have done or may be doing in confronting colonialism. That is open confrontation. That is war. And that is my Gaelic ancestry. I'm an O'Hurley. I'd acknowledge If anyone knows that clan name, they're from Limerick and Ireland. They're deeply part of the battle against colonialisation. But my Guri grandfather, Sangati Biripai, said to me, in our culture as First Nations, we are diplomats. We do not fight people to death. That is not part of our culture. And that's something that I just finish on and say, I think the epitome of that is represented by people like Bennelong, like Pemulwuy. My way, we had Terramidji, a great warrior who was hung by the colony, all the resistance leaders, but all the wisdom, and more importantly, whether it's Yulong, where I sit today, or where I'm from, Kipara, the cultural laws that rule us, and the dignity and the diplomacy in which our culture is embedded is certainly a great example of peace. And for now, I say yakai, see you when I'm looking at you. I'll speak soon when we all get back together for a Q&A.
Thank you, Nathan Essolbala, for that presentation. Very powerful, and it's exactly what we're looking for here is the context to, we're talking about peace, and the truth is absolutely vital to understanding how we make peace. There are so many lessons from the past, and there's also the truth of just how advanced our societies were and our culture to see us being the oldest living, continuous living culture on the planet. Thank you, Nathan. We'll now go to Emelda. Emelda, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm coming from the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. I'd like to acknowledge all Indigenous lands that you're zooming in from today. And of course, this land was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I just want to echo Brother Nathan, you know, in terms of we can't ignore our history. And where I'm coming from as the chair and second generation Australian South Sea Islander of a Pacific slave trade that has gone as a forgotten people as a part of the history of this nation. And we can't keep repeating the colonial wrongs of the past. And I'm incredibly grateful to be included as a part of this forum today, because it gives us an opportunity to come together and work better together for a united front on common issues and in particular statement from the heart. I'm a second generation Australian South Sea Islander, and for those that don't know, we are the descendants of Australia's Pacific slave trade. There were some 60,000 men predominantly taken from the 80 islands of Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. We have an evident kinship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island Australians. My own heritage, I have traced back to the Cape York Aboriginal region of Queensland, and also Bamiga and Errab Island through the family names of Santo and Tor or Toa. Now, with that, our organisation was formed to revive the call for recognition of this peoples and bring into the narrative through our dual and tricultural heritage, leaders such as my mother, Nalia Nares, Shireen Malamu, Auntie Carriet Pangus, Graham Mooney, all of these people who you know as staunch Aboriginal Kanak activists, Auntie Benita Mabo, also our founding members, in reviving the call for recognition and making sure that we have this opportunity to speak to the truth of this history, to speak to our own communities about the facts that occurred for our histories in this country. 90% were taken from Vanuatu of our peoples. 95% of that trade were men. That trade was first started and here in New South Wales as Sydney as a receiving port for Pacific Island indentured labour or blackbirding in the 1790s. 1847 saw Benjamin Boyd, celebrated entrepreneur and parliamentarian, bring the first 200 Kanaks here to Eden, New South Wales. We have been advocating for the change of Benjamin Boyd Park with the First Nations mob down there in recognition of the atrocities that have occurred through that action in itself. The coming of the light with the Torres Strait and our South Sea Islander London missionaries. That was something that was born in collaboration, but a form of Christianity and colonisation. for our peoples up there. Some 15,000 deaths occurred across this nation, in particular for Queensland, that received between 1863 and 1908, the 60-odd thousand from these islands. No one speaks of the deaths and the atrocities and the frontier wars that occurred between South Sea Islander and Aboriginal people. There's a lot of sorry business. This country bears witness to the blood of our peoples, and we need to resolve these issues that still need to be shared with traditional owners of those lands that suffered through this colonisation as well as back in the islands. How do we reconnect and keep speaking about the healing process that's required for our peoples, you know, enable to overcome some of these continued racist policies and dialogues that are happening when there's lack of understanding. We're talking about peace building and reconciliation. We need to reconcile with the truth of slavery in this country and what that means, and unpack that for our families in order for our next generations to move forward in peace. So if we're sincerely speaking about peace, then what is that in terms of action? Complexities with our communities is that genocide is occurring, you know, continually. We were absorbed under Aboriginal Protection Acts of the 1930s. You know, what does that look like in reclaiming that identity, that dispossession, and the need for greater conversations about cultural adoption, interconnected bloodlines, and, you know, people that are lost and bewildered. You know, our communities are suffering, our jails are full because of this dispossession. So talking to federal government, politicians, and also, you know, I guess the goodwill that comes from communities and those that are on this call today. How do we create a brighter future for our next generations? I just want to say also, I want to acknowledge just all the good people, and Dr. Murray Geisler, who's on this call today, with the continued work and support, Nathan Moran and the Land Council, and forever, you know, being at our side in solidarity, and Thomas as well. So thank you too much to everybody here.
Thank you, Emelda. A very important presentation about, you know, a great blight on our history as a nation, and how that links in, not only to the truth that we need to tell all Australians about slavery, but also how it links into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, and how we share the struggle, you know, in the way that our people have been treated.
Mm.
Okay, now I would like to invite Carol Vale to join us.
All right, Warrung, everybody. Thank you for being with us here today. My name's Carol Vale. I am a Dungari Gumbaynggirr woman. So Nathan there is a countryman of mine, and I certainly acknowledge our old people, Nathan. I want to certainly acknowledge traditional owners and cultural knowledge holders, custodians of country everywhere that each of you are today. Recognition of country and acknowledgement is not to be taken lightly. It is as someone who has worked in the policy arena for over 30 years, you know, the fact that we now have to do this, that this is required is something that's really important. And I never get sick of not acknowledging country and hearing it being recognised by others. So let me acknowledge country. I want to pay my respects to the Turrbal and Yagara people whose lands I am on today. I want to pay my respects to my own Dungari Mob and Gumbaynggirr and Anaiwan people, and thank them for the wisdom that I know runs through my blood because of them. And I certainly want to acknowledge traditional owners on the lands that all of you are today. How do you come after, those powerful conversations? I want to share just a couple of stories that I guess illustrates the importance of peace and why I continue in the struggle from where I sit. And one of them is, I grew up in Armidale on the Aboriginal mission there. My family come from all of those missions down there. My mum and dad are actually from Burnt Bridge, the same mission there that Nathan's old people are from. And so there's our family is steeped with history and the stories that go with Aboriginal families are being forcibly removed to these places, as well as having to live within them, and then also being excluded from them in certain occasions as well. But a couple of stories I really want to just touch on, and then that can sort of show my input in here. But I want to tell first of a story about my mum. My mother's mother died when she was 2 years old, and she went to live with different aunties and uncles. She was sent to Sydney as a domestic when she at the age of 12. The story I want to share you today is how my mum marched in Canberra, and she always tells she had a scar on her ankle because she marched and was involved in some of the struggles down there. So I stand on the shoulders of that woman that has that scar on her ankle. My dad, he got to go to year 8. Which is pretty much I guess a bit of that wasn't a common thing in his era. So the importance of education was critical to him. That man learnt to read from reading words off cans, food cans and things like that. He instilled in us the importance of education, and it is not lost on me the fact that when I was in year 3 in 1972 in New South Wales, I got ducks of that class, but that principal of that school could have also had me removed on the suggestion or the advice of the non-Indigenous parents of my classmates, simply because I was an Aboriginal girl. And if they thought my being in that class was detrimental to the learning of their children. If that would have occurred, that would have had a significant impact on the love of learning and what I believe to be my strong dedication to education, and that showing up in my grandchildren. And my grandson having finished year 12 last year and being certainly my grandson finishing year 12 and now studying to become a pilot. So we have that within our family. My other story comes from my grandmother, and at the age of 17, when I left Armidale, ready to go off to Sydney, her advice to me was that she said to me, Callie, you are just about to go off to work with those government people. I want you to remember what I know in here. And she pointed to her heart and to her head, and she said, you have to help them to understand what we know, what I know, because if you do that, then that will make it a better place for all of us. She said that to a 17-year-old girl. I have never forgotten that and have carried that with me throughout my whole career. And then I come to my work, and I work for government for a long time, and it's been in the policy arena, and every piece of that has always been to help to, I guess, either combat historical policies that have left an incredible legacy of disadvantage on our peoples, but also other policies, the emergence of policies that have certainly contributed and lay a strong foundation for our people as well. My business, Murawin means to be educated in the highest sense in my Dungari language. And what comes with that education is responsibility and what you do with that. And so I have lived, I try to, everything about my work, I try to do that. The context of truth telling is critical and at the heart of what we do as well. You can't have healing if we don't have a truth telling and then a reckoning, and then we move on to how we be in this country together. I am the mother of 4. And 3 sons and 1 daughter, and every single one of them has married interculturally. I then am the grandmother of 10 grandchildren. Again, each of them, they represent multicultural Australia. And so the concept of truth telling leading to then reconciliation and healing is critical for me, and certainly for the work that I do, so that I can contribute to them growing up in Australia, where they can be proud of their Aboriginality, but also they get to live in a society where they are valued where they can live lives of peace, of peace and harmony. And I know that's, that I don't want that to be airy fairy. I want that to be their reality. One of my little grandsons has a Sudanese father, so he is a very dark-skinned little boy. During NAIDOC this year, other little boys at a vacation care centre that he went to asked him, white-skinned little boys asked him, why are your lips the way they are? Why is your hair the way they are? And they asked that in a way that that was upsetting to him. He went home that day, his mum caught him in the room pulling at his hair and talking about how ugly he was. Broke my heart, and I don't want that to be the sort of world that he grows up in. And so I went to the school and said, let me come in and be auntie to you so that those children that go to this school can understand the beauty of the big lips and the curly hair and where that comes from, not to make fun of it. But this is our society, and this is, a world that we all belong to. And then finally, the concept of Makarrata, I just love. I got to go to Gama a few years ago, I saw the gift of Makarrata being gifted from the Yolngu people to the Prime Minister of the day. I came back and I thought, we can't leave this just to the Indigenous leaders of this country. We need to step up and do some of this myself. So I run Makarrata workshops. I haven't done it for a while, but I came back and did that for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians to understand Makarrata and how we all can play a role in that. And the concept, I love that you spoke to the spearing, Nathan, because it wasn't about killing, it was about justice and a reckoning, and then how we healed that. One of the things I loved about the Makarrata is that it is the whole process, but it is about the families of the victim healing the perpetrator back to wellness. And I think that's a gift that we all can be playing in. How do we contribute to our country being brought back to a place of wellness? I certainly look forward to the Q&A later. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Carol. Wonderful presentation. Absolutely brilliant. And some very important points there about dispute resolution. Given we're talking about peace, the International Day of Peace next week, the way we reach peace is by having the truth in our hearts, the good faith to reach a settlement. And the thing about Makarrata is that there is a stronger relationship once that process has been completed. As the Uluru statement says, Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. I'd like to invite Shane now, Shane Charles. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks to Brother Nathan for the welcome, and thanks for the narrative from previous speakers. I must pay my respects to my elders of the past and the present and emerging leaders. We are the oldest living culture on the planet, and that's worth something. When I think about what we fight for, it's the foundation of who we are, this connection. I guess through my country, Yorta, I come from my grandmother's country, the Warrung and Wurundjeri, through that connection. And I've been blessed enough, I guess, to be gifted this amazing cultural knowledge. But also the things that come with that is that trauma. And we hear about many of the things which previous speakers have spoken about. And I guess the first wave we had on Yorta country through the Moira and through the Dungala, the Murray River, or the river systems, the first wave was disease. We had a lot of people in our country who were dying before they'd even seen the first white man, through the smallpox and through the common cold, another disease that was brought. We see it as germ warfare, I guess, coming through country. Now, I guess, in terms of, this country, and Emelda touched on it earlier, sovereignty has never been ceded. I come from a long line of activists, and I have angels on my shoulders with Annie Marge Tucker, a photo on the wall there. But grew up with the narrative and grew up with that resilience, I guess, from, people, my elders of the past, and every footstep you take in this country, you walk in the footprints of great people and an ancient culture. My grandmother told me that we are the cradle of creation, first man. She always said that, and it was important for us to know who we are. And I guess when you look at, the true culture through a true cultural lens, we have these four fundamental values of culture and law, and that first one being respect, and it always starts with self, family, extended family, and more importantly, country. And that acceptance of law and what was, for the self and family, extended family, and country. Also, that third one is about the relationship you have with yourself, family, extended family, and more importantly, country. And we have this connection, this deep connection that we have, which is unexplainable for non-Indigenous people. It's hard to grasp this deep connection, or deep listening, or deep hearing, or deep seeing. I guess I've spent my lifetime, I've always been taught by my elders where I sat on the Dungala River. And my grandmother said the river flows through my veins. It's a pull. I have to come back and I have to wash in that. I have to light the fire and heal my spirit through the smoke. That cleanses me, and feel that warmth of the flames. But also, more importantly, to sit on country and connect. I've been taught those cultural values, but she also taught me that it's my role to acquire this knowledge, but more importantly, pass it on to those, first and foremost, family, extended family, and to shine the light on this amazing, beautiful, rich culture. And it is a national disgrace that everyday Australians do not know enough about this amazing culture that we have and the diversity that we have amongst us. Since colonisation, we've all been put in the same basket and branded as, dumb, primitive natives, useless. But yet, when you look at the culture in its true form and you really connect, you find that it was far superior in our knowledge and so many things. So I guess, in terms of the Yorta journey, we'd seen the devastation of before white man came, and then we'd seen, the effects of that. And I guess through this whole rounding us up like sheep and cattle and putting us on reserves and taking land, my people had had enough. And in 1939, we walked off. And I guess, when I think about Kamargundra, you may have seen the sapphires, that's all about my family and how, we're able to way ahead of their time, especially, in terms of the days of war, but also, it started earlier with Uncle William Cooper, and our education level was the highest level we're able to obtain, was a grade 3 level. And once we got to that big room, as it was called, you were basically kicked out. And I guess the bigger threat was educated Aboriginal people to the colony at the time. So, the likes of Uncle William and Uncle Doug and many others that had learnt this about education, learnt to read and learnt to write in secret. And on a place called Malaga prior to Kamargundra, in a little shack that they call the Scholar's Hut, and in secret and under candlelight, they learnt to read. And I guess, we'd always been taught that we'd had this worldly view as Aboriginal people, and I'd seen the work of those that have gone before me. We saw Uncle William stand for workers' rights, and we'd seen Uncle William, the only man on the planet who stood up for the Jewish community in the name of humanity, that this is not right, even in amongst the devastation and destruction that was happening on our own countries, I guess. So I guess out of that, I this resilience that we have as Aboriginal people is profound, and we talk about the things that have beaten us down, but where the resilience continues us on, and we get up and we go again. These are the things that I've been taught. And I guess through the Yorta claim, we had been through that court and with the High Court, and then, the decisions, I guess the WIC decision, the 10-point plan came out. So they were shifting the goalposts constantly. And then I guess the judgment that came down from Judge Onley was that the tide of time has washed away our rights. And unfortunately, when that decision was handed down, we'd had a lot of our elders, within our respective community pass on. They've been holding on for hope and holding on for something we thought was coming, but it never came. So, I guess, today in the Victorian context, I've followed in the footsteps of work that Uncle Doug did with lake tyres and, stopping the mission from being closed. And I've gone, probably the next wave of being able to support. My journey has been probably a crazy one, working right across government and trying to find those opportunities, shining the light on opportunities that we as Aboriginal people, need moving forward, and how important country is, to us. I know in my heart and in my spirit that my trauma can never be healed. But what I can do is continue to shine the light on this rich, beautiful culture, but also in other pieces of work that I do is to connect people, to sit and have the yarn. And my grandmother always taught me it's quite easy, son, to sit down and have a cup of tea and have a conversation. It's about deconstructing and reconstructing history, but also building a new history forward, building hope for our people, our children, all our children that are going to follow us after we go. And I share as much knowledge as I can, but I know that I'll learn until the day I die about who I am and where I come from, and continue that journey until that day. And then one day I will, sit with those that have gone before me. But before I do, there's lots of work to be done. I honour you, Thomas, for the work that you're doing in terms of the Uluru statement. In Victoria, we have the first People's Assembly was being developed, and we have treaty and truth-telling on the table. And what does that look like moving forward? As a state, but more importantly, as a nation, I think there's a bigger job at hand, and I'm loving where I am at the moment, working and living as a cultural resident at AMA with the Global Initiatives of Change, and we're developing these opportunities for people to come and sit and yarn. We're supporting the Uluru Statement and the work that Thomas is doing. We're supporting so much around the country, and also how I'm currently the co-chair of Reconciliation Victoria, and I see so many opportunities. I've worked at the grassroots level with reconciliation right through to government at the top, and it's an opportunity where there is a framework there, and how we can continue conversations through that framework, but also the framework, when you look at reconciliation, it holds people accountable when they sign up for it. There's a process, there's 4 levels. Right? And I see so many opportunities, and I see and feel the shift in this country towards Aboriginal people. That we have more than 90% of the country is for reconciliation, but don't know how to go about it. So there are many vehicles, I guess, throughout the country, and this diversity that we have with the work everyone's doing, Emelda and Carol and Nathan, and many, many more. And that it's, building momentum and putting it on the agenda. And, maybe one day we can all stand together, and colour doesn't mean anything, but more importantly, to learn this beautiful, rich culture. It's the oldest living culture. If that's not worth something, well, I don't know what is. So, I'll continue. And in my space at the minute, we're looking at trust building programs. We're looking at cultural immersion. To understand country, you've got to walk with the people out on country, to walk in our footsteps, to be able to see what you can't, hear what you can't, and feel what you can't through the Aboriginal lens. I could go on for days, brother. But I think I'll just leave it there for now and look forward to the chat. So, I'm honoured to be here and with so many passionate people, and I honour you for being up on a Saturday morning to come and listen to this. And it's all about, where we're heading, looking after country, learning, sharing knowledge, deconstructing and reconstructing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shane. Very powerful presentation, and a very good point. We've got over 100 wonderful people that share our hope for change, and I hope that you all heard some common themes there across all of our speakers about covering the history, which is what we wanted to do in this panel, and the context behind the work that we need to do. The connection to country, connection to each other, and the hope, but quite practical, ways of achieving peace. It would be beneficial to all of us if First Nations had a stronger political voice in this country. That's absolutely certain. Talking about storytellers and how we connect things up, the lessons from the past. Next, I'd like to invite Adrian to introduce his brilliant film. Adrian, please introduce yourself a bit more, brother. I'm a bit hopeless at that, obviously. But please let us know who you are and about this film, particularly the section that we're about to play.
Yeah, look, thanks, brother, for inviting me on and for including me in the panel. Such an amazing panel with Emelda and Nathan and Thomas and Shane and Carol, and it's really great listening to the storytelling that is happening. My name is Adrian Russell Wills. I'm a Wurundjeri man originally from Bourke. I was removed from my family at 3 days old and grew up in Sydney. So my life has been a journey and a reconnection back home. And I've been on that journey my entire life since I left my home in 18 years old. So, and in terms of my work and my career, sort of been engaged in healing, particularly my own journey back to my own family through storytelling. And I've found through the power of storytelling that healing can be found and can actually exist. And I also think it is tantamount to documenting history and to be present and be visible as well. I want to acknowledge the Darug people and the Bidjigal people on whose land I come to you from today. I want to offer my respect to all the elders and generations of the Darug and Bidjigal whose land was never ceded and who continue to live through in their culture, their language and their customs. As I said, I'm a Wurundjeri man from Bourke originally. I have connections to Barkindji and to Wonkamara mob as well, up in the far, far west of this state. And I'm here to introduce the film that we made called 88, which is telling a story of a nation celebrating an insidious moment in this country's history in the face of a people who lived the incredible, painful truth. In the film, it's talked about the 26th of January, 1988, as being the day of true reconciliation. But for me, particularly now, a few years after making this film, I look back on this film now and I feel like it's a story about reckoning and the epitome of survival of a people and of a culture and of a reality. It's a film about showing up, being heard, and continuing to fight for our humanity as traditional owners and guardians of our countries. And as I said, I think my main point in this film and in the work that I do is, as I said, storytelling, and through storytelling is healing, it's passing on of knowledge. I want to acknowledge people whose shoulders I stand on and can benefit from on a daily basis in the work that I do. Uncle Bob Mazza, Auntie Justine Saunders, Uncle Lester, they were my teachers, they were my heroes, and they were the people that showed me that being present and being part of the future is actually getting involved and being part of the story and the narrative, not being relegated to the corridors of history. So I think activism is part of what I do in my work, and I'm celebrating it. I thank Nathan and Emelda and Thomas particularly for inviting this film into this panel. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's called 88. And I had a ball making it. Happy to answer any questions after if that's what you want to do. Thanks, Tomas.
Wow, what a very important piece of storytelling, Adrian. Very powerfully done. You know, lots of memories there. You know, and some of those people have passed on. Some of those elders, like Uncle John Christopherson, you know, a wonderful leader. He was at Uluru. All of his experiences, you know, and Josie Crawshaw and so many other people that I saw in that film. Thank you, Adrian, for sharing that. Can you just let us know, brother, people find the film?
I believe you can buy it, purchase it, but that, again, that's the producer would know that, Michaela. Apologies, I was supposed to read out the disclaimer prior to, in terms of people who passed away. So my apologies on that. But yeah, no, it's certainly a film that's in the, I think the film is shown in schools now as well, with a study guide, and I think it's a good conversation starter. The most amazing thing for me was the archival footage that was taken on the convoys and on the trips. That was Christopherson and some of and Anne Wright had some of that footage, and it was just incredible and never been seen before. So that was that's the power of storytelling. That's the power of documenting, you know, our mob, and particularly after they've passed on now. So, and also for generations to come, they can watch that film hopefully and see that it does matter. It does make a difference. And to see our mob sort of convoy like that, there was, you know, 800 buses, I think, that had come over from around Australia. So yeah, it was a real privilege to make that film.
Thank you, Adrian. Absolutely great work, mate. And I encourage everybody, when you can get a hold of it, to to buy it and watch it and share it around. It's an important part of our history, the history of our struggle. We saw Invasion Day was mentioned, and we say always was, always will be Aboriginal land. It always was and always will be Invasion Day as well. William Cooper has been mentioned on this panel, and the Day of Mourning, something, Nathan, I know you're very close to, where you are, Metro Land Council. I might ask you to talk a bit about that, mate. Can you let us know?
Oh, all loves to Shane in opening up and hearing the journey that Shane's connected to directly the place that we take care of. That is 150 to 150 Elizabeth Street, Sydney. But to our mob, it's known as the Day of Mourning site. We're preeminently probably the first all Aboriginal gathering of our people to put together a plan for our mob occurred. It was led quite beautifully, as Shane attested, from mobs in Cumragudja, but it was a collaboration of many different First Nations mobs coming from as far as Nunga communities, certainly Koori communities, Murris, Guris, Kuris, all coming together in 1938 on the 26th of January to put forward the proclamation and declaration that it is a day of mourning for our people. We do not celebrate on that day. And from that day was born the 10-point plan that included many things that still ring truth today when we talk about the 1948 United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. I'd say to many, if you haven't read it already, have a look at the 1938's 10-point plan. It's very much aligned to those same principles on what all humans should deserve, the dignity to be themselves, and certainly access to human things like housing, education, representation. And I'd certainly touch on and acknowledge the beautiful leaders that came together from the Aboriginal Progressive Association that came to our patch in Gadigal, gathered and declared on the 26th of January 1938 the Day of Mourning. We treasure them for their wisdom. Also acknowledge the beautifulness of our culture when looking at who we chose to represent us from that great gathering and forum. and deep acknowledgements and loves to all the Lapa mob, in that being Auntie Pearl Brown, later married name Gibbs. She was our first elected representative of our people to speak on behalf of our people, and she certainly led the way in addressing matters that still affect us, like the policies of removing our children. She's known quite famously for tipping off the mobs in community straight after committee meetings, beating them to those communities where she knew the tip-off of removals was occurring. But it's the message that she carried that certainly was about representation that our Land Council proudly stands today on the back of. Being part of the communities in the 1960s and 70s who were at the forefront of calling for national land rights, leading the way for Congress gatherings in the 70s, ironically like Thomas and I gathered recently at the Uluru statement, to put together compacts and agreements, unfortunately curtailed by the Commonwealth Government. We didn't achieve national land rights, but as a local community here in Redfern, we established what's known as the Redfern Land Council, and then later become incorporated and known as our name is today as Metropolitan Local Land Council. But I'd acknowledge, the day of mourning, a centrepiece of our rights movements, the bringing together of all of our peoples to have an agreement on what we seek, I believe is the basis of a yarn and discussion that goes back to those earlier references of relationship building and discussions, and more importantly, actions by Bennelong and Colby, the first peoples of Gadigals and Wongals and Pemway, that we seek always to live peacefully with people. We seek humane ways to live with people. But I think we also represent a very dignified, if not one of the most dignified human cultures on earth. And 1938 is a great representation of that, and we're very proud to be the custodians of that place. It's the centre of our rights, and also had some linkages to beautifully other parts of the community, from the Greek Hellenic community who we got it handed back from. We've helped from the Commonwealth when acquiring it. Certainly the extension that it was known as the Italian Club, the German Club, had a little bit of time known as the Mandarin Club. It's known as the Australia Hall. And I'd say to anyone who'd like to let us know if you'd like to come and visit, experience that place. We're very honoured to have the hall in near virtual situ from that day's meeting, open to our community for our events now, after being returned with the assistance of the Indigenous Land Sea Corporation. So it's a very proud story of our cultures, more importantly, a hiatus in our rights movement, and certainly what I believe is the start and genesis of what we still seek today, ultimately things in accordance with that 10-point plan.
Thank you, Nathan. Incredible courage from those leaders of those days, just like in that film in '88, called '88. Interesting, the March for Freedom, Justice and Hope. I just want to mention that I've got no doubt that many of the people that are joining us today and in our audience were probably part of those marches and protests and marched with us in solidarity. So I want to acknowledge your long solidarity. Who would have thought that today we still haven't achieved those things, though? We were starting from a pretty poor spot, really. There was a lot of work to do. Emelda, you mentioned, I think, it was Shane that mentioned that over 90% of people are saying that they want reconciliation today. And that's the great opportunity that we have. That's the result of all the work that you've done. Emelda, you talk about the goodwill, which is exactly what I'm talking about there. Can you tell me your ideas for and the work that you do to transfer that goodwill into results?
I think for Australian South Sea Islanders, Port Jackson, it's all about acknowledgement of identity and heritage and bloodline, and working with like-mindedness. So all of these good people on the call today, yourselves, and just, knowing that people are coming from a good place when people want to get involved with these movements. I think in terms of goodwill, and when I reflect on '88 and also my time spent as a 12-year-old going to Black Theatre, Auntie Betty Fisher and my mother working together with Carol Johnson. And I remember my father's from the Caribbean, and his family, Uncle Albert Laguerre, used to come in and play drums or Congo drums on the weekends when we used to do our dance classes at Black Theatre. Now, that was goodwill. It was a Black collaborative process, but it was inclusive of all nationalities. And I'll never forget the strength and resilience that I take from that in the work that I do today, coming from a long line of activism and family from the Tweed, you know, the Corowas, the Togos, the so on and so forth, we all know. But goodwill is about showing up and putting our differences aside and trying to understand each other and where we're coming from with our lens in life. And I think with the opportunity of, you know, our own self-determination, our own storytelling, it gives you strength in that we can stand strong in our spirituality, and we've got to draw on that heritage that is so rich within our bloodlines and use that to navigate this colonial world that we try to find or make sense of, you know, the oppression that's occurred for us, unpack, decolonize, and take back. But it's not to offend anyone. And people need to understand that our birthright has been stolen as a collective, as Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Australian South Sea Islander communities and peoples of this land. You know, it needs to be recognised, and we need to embrace that. Our highest order governments need to recognise that. You can't deny the history of this country, the collective history of this country. And then only then you can move forward. Once you lay that foundation of truth, reconciliation, peace building, then we can move forward. But until such time, people invite each other in to share each other's stories and work in solidarity as that Black Power movement coming out of Redfern. You know, when apartheid was lifted, communities migrated here. My mother was one of the first in 1967. You know, so we have those histories that are untold amongst ourselves. And you know, incredibly proud to see myself in 88. I just realized a 21-year-old. And when were we strongest? You know, Black Power movement. And that's not a racist thing. That's a fact that we find strength in each other as a people. So, and we got on, and it was, you know, it was fantastic times of just being on that journey together and learning together. So I don't know, you know, and then, you know, people that have, I guess, thoughts around what does leadership look like for our communities and the complexities of Makarrata and what that means as a statement from the heart for our community groups. And how do you bring in that interconnected kinship to share that thinking, because we're all connected. So what does that look like for us? I mean, further work, of course, you know, coming together and having more forums again, getting back to face-to-face, which will be great eventually as we overcome this pandemic, and maybe going on a road trip and let's recreate some of that history. Thank you.
Wonderful contribution, Emelda. I thought that was you there. You've hardly changed.
I know, right? Too deadly.
Yeah, awesome. Great to see you. Yeah. Emelda, you know, you were talking about the complexity of Makarrata. Carol, how you've done a lot of work in that space. How is it received by people when you teach them about, you know, this ancient dispute resolution process? And I should say, Makarrata is the Yolngu word for this dispute resolution process, but I'm certain that in all of our hundreds of First Nations, our own languages, we have the very same thing in different names. Carol?
Yeah. So first of all, in 2037, I'm able to retire, able to retire officially. Well, and I was going to go on some sort of road trip, but now I think I'm going to get ready for 2038. That was so inspiring, Adrian. Thank you. And I'm going to go buy that and share that far and wide. Thank you. And lots of memories there. I remember at the time I was actually home as a young mum, and I was so jealous because I was at home looking after all the babies because my little one was she'd only just been born, and and all my cousins and sisters and brothers were marching, and I couldn't. I was the one at home. So, but my goodness, that, yeah, such a momentous occasion. I'm very aware that every First Nation has its Makarrata process. Why I chose to take up the opportunity and do what I can to, I guess, informing others about the concept of Makarrata and what it stands for, is because I thought, Thomas, we can't leave it to those that are in the political spotlight like yourselves. There's too much work to be done. And so I would just, I created a bit of a workshop out of it, and my beautiful friends from, the Telfords are on here, and Robin and Maria Maguire, like, they taught me how to facilitate. And so, professional facilitation. So I was able to create this workshop around the Makarrata and take it out far and wide. I put together a bit of so that girl that was born in 1988, she put together a bit of a booklet for me on different aspects of Makarrata and the history behind that, and the fact that it wasn't the first time it was gifted to the Australian people. And so I would just, I would facilitate these workshops, and it was taken well because people didn't know. When people understand the concept of that it's a restorative justice ceremony, or not ceremony is not the right word, but it's a restorative justice process, they are amazed. And then when the reality hits, when the reality clicks in, that, because then I contextualized it to the way that Indigenous Australians are now saying to non-Indigenous Australians, we need to tell the truth, have the reckoning, so we can get on with, living in a reconciled country, basically. But truth telling is at the heart of it. And somebody has to pay for the wrong that was done. That's also part of it. So people, and I said, take out, I've got the booklet up on my webpage as well. So I said, please go there, download it, share it far and wide. And so the education piece is really important. But I really love it, because I when I was putting the booklets together, I got my little preschool grandchildren to help me fold it. And so I taught them about Makarrata, and next minute they were going to their preschool saying, Makarrata. So I thought, that's good, because then those teachers will say, what are you saying? And they can go and research that. So it's about always providing opportunities for others to learn in a way that they won't glaze over and say, oh, here we go again. Very important work.
Great work, Carol. The work that you're doing just expands out. I mean, it's something I've experienced as well. Children love to teach the adults in their life about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. They're so proud of it. They haven't had those prejudices ingrained in them yet. And it's such an important thing that we can do. You mentioned the importance of truth-telling, Carol. Shane, I remember you were saying that over 90% of Australians want reconciliation today. I mean, what a great number, what a great statistic, really, that I think tells us that most Australians already know the truth, right? A great majority of Australians already know the truth of our past. What's needed is now the opportunity for all those people that have marched over the bridge with us, that joined the convoys, that have learnt from their children, that have learnt from people like Carol, that know the truth, to transfer that truth now into fundamentally changing who we are as Australians. Shane, can you tell us about, your work there, trying to transfer that 90% of support into action, mate?
Look, and I guess, when I think about truth telling, and how, we're, as a nation, we need to, sit and hear the truth and talk the truth. But truth telling starts with us as mob. I see so much divide amongst us, but yet I see so much opportunity when you look at the pillars through reconciliation, where it's about that respect, it's about the opportunities, and it's about the relationships, so the more, with some of the beautiful work you're doing, Carol, there, in terms of, the more resources that we can have there, the more we can share, that, because, and this, as I keep saying, this diversity that we have as mob, one size doesn't fit all. We're out of the box now. We're not all in the same box. And it'd be great, Brother Nathan, there to let's have another march, but with a whole new intent. Let's all gather, like that. And I saw so many members. I saw cuz there, Auntie Linda Burnley, and I guess through Mum's connection through my great-great-grandmother, Ingram. I didn't pay respect for that when I started, but yeah, I had so many emotions, I guess, just watching that, and so many beautiful people that, some are gone now, but how, we can shine the light on. And one thing I've always said that they're always turning to Aboriginal people to say, well, how can we help? And I see this gap in terms of cultural intelligence. And we have a lot of non-Indigenous people that have been a part of our communities for a long, long time, and being able to use that, I guess, to empower or to share that knowledge amongst themselves. One tells 10, it tells 100. So that's another piece of work we're looking at in terms of capturing that intelligence, but also, providing the resources. Reconciliation is a vehicle that goes from grassroots to the top. And we're talking about, building an army, I always say, in terms of being able to empower people and acknowledge the learnings that they've had without the fears. And, under all these white constructs that we have, in Victoria, we have these registered Aboriginal parties and this divide and conquer lens and all these things. I see that in terms of education, that the children know more than parents, about our journey, about our struggles, but also about our culture as well, in the wider community. So it's more opportunities to learn, I guess, to sign up, and by signing up as an organisation to reconciliation, you're signing up to a commitment, but also you're signing up to be able to apply that flag and share that knowledge and empower yourselves, with that knowledge as well. I see a bigger picture, Art, in terms of Emelda there, based around that. It's outside this country. My father said, there's a bigger, we had this worldly view, so let's use that in terms of that. And, I guess I've been brought here for a reason at the place I'm at, which is global initiative. So, we're sort of tapping into this whole globe about, providing the support for us and us providing support for them. What's worked here and how that can be transferred to other cultures around the world. They took it to South Africa, what the model here, and they called it apartheid over there. We have the same journey in so many different ways, but how we can build those resources. But we as mob have to get it, sit and have the makarata amongst us. I see those challenges and the factions within our community be created under a government process or white construct. So, but empowering, through reconciliation, it's a framework that's there. We're about to roll out a resource based around treaty and truth telling. So the more resources we can share amongst that space, the more people will understand. It's not about sympathy. It's about understanding. And maybe one day we can as a nation, draw a line in the sand and have a national day of healing for us all. We have and change that narrative. I see the inconsistencies in terms of, people that are coming to this country are already poisoned by the narrative of what they think, that this country portrays as us as Aboriginal people. So a lot of opportunity through that reconciliation space, and I see it as a framework that's already there, and how do we tap into it? But how does that expand? And how we as mob, I know we as mob need to come together even more so in our own countries, and have that truth telling, and be open and honest.
Thanks a lot, Shane. Very good points there, especially I think about when we're talking about peace, and one of the tactics to stop peace and to cause division amongst our people, those tactics have been used against our people. We have been purposely divided. It's not that we are naturally a divisive people, but there have been great, strategies used against us to keep us divided. This is one of the reasons why the priority reform called for in the Uluru Statement is a voice, it's a representative body. It is the opportunity that we're talking about to bring our people together, determine our priorities, reach consensus regularly, and then go out there with the sort of political power that we need to make change. And we're all here talking about peace as people that want peace in this, not only in this country, but in this world. I think what these panelists have shared with us today certainly demonstrates that with all of the lessons that we have from pre-colonisation, from throughout colonisation, from our experiences and our determination to make change, if we were in the centre of decision-making in this country, then surely we would achieve peace and be a much better nation for it. Look, I think we can wrap up now. I haven't seen any questions in the thing, but I know that our panelists are pretty exhausted. It's a long session, even if we finish in an hour and a half. And so I'm going to wrap up the next panel today. I hope that you're registered for it. It is about the Uluru Statement that begins at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. What I'm going to ask everybody to do before we finish is a bit of an action. It's going to be on the video. This is being recorded. I'm going to ask you, well, firstly, before we go to that, because we'll finish straight after it, but I want to just thank you all for joining us, for giving some of your time on a Saturday morning. I want to thank Robin and Diane for helping us to make this happen, and the whole team from Raising Peace, the panelists. Thank you for your generosity, and I hope I didn't miss anyone. So the action now, I want you all to turn your videos on. Diane's going to switch to gallery view for us. We're going to say some words collectively together, and I want you all to be waving your hands, to show that you are in solidarity with First Nations people. What we're going to say on the count of 3 when I do it is we're going to say, it's time for voice, treaty, truth. It's time for peace. Okay, so I'll repeat that. It's time for voice, treaty, truth. It's time for peace. Okay, and say it at about that pace. All right. So everybody can turn off their microphones now, turn on your videos. We're going to do that very soon, very soon. Going to be a bit of echo and noise here. We're going to make some noise in any way we can nowadays because we can't get on the streets and march for freedom, justice and hope. Let's do it virtually. Yeah? All right. 3, 2, 1. It's time.
It's time for voice, treaty, truth. Time for peace. Time for peace.
I love it.
Peace, treaty, peace.
Peace, treaty, truth.
Voice, treaty, truth. Time for peace, treaty, peace.
All together now.
Time for peace.